Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Kingdom of Dreams podcast, The Making of Stories. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. Today, my guest is director Jack MacInnes. He was one of the two directors responsible for the Netflix documentary series Surviving Black Hawk Down, which was also produced by Ridley Scott Productions, along with the film that was originally directed by Ridley Scott that came out almost 24 years ago. And there were some really cool moments that Jack talked about during the production that were not expected. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jack MacInnes for Surviving Black Hawk Down that you can see on Netflix. I remember watching it on TV, like the footage. I specifically remember watching all that. And then when Ridley Scott made the film,
Mm.
I remember watching in theater with one of my friends and absolutely was blown away by it. Like after Saving Private Ryan, I think it's one of the rare movies that
Yeah,
depicts war in such a brutal way.
yeah.
And then when I saw Surviving Black Hawk Down, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And
Mm.
I was really taken by the trailer, first of all, because I'm a big fan of trying to figure out how a problem happens from all angles,
Yeah.
as crazy as those angles are. That's how I like to produce my work. But tell me about and I saw the series and I loved it. And tell me about your involvement and how this kind of took the shape as it did from the beginning, the genesis of the project.
Yeah. So when I first heard about it, it had been in development for a while, and I think it excited me for a couple of reasons. I was excited that Netflix wanted to get into this space of making war stories, and that felt like a new frontier and like a new challenge for me. And obviously, the thing that also really excited me about it was that they were committed to telling this story from both sides. And there was we had a great Somali producer and journalist on board, a guy called Jamal Osman, who, this had, I think in a way, this had really sort of begun as his baby, that he had he's really quite a big name in Africa. He reports for Channel 4 News and he's obviously grown up around this story, and everyone in Somalia has grown up around this story. I feel like October the 3rd, 1993 in Somalia is like, where were you when JFK was shot? When were you on 9/11? It's that day
Mm.
that everyone in that community knows and understands, and everyone has a story. And as a journalist working in that field, he had obviously been picking up these stories over the years and thought no one's ever told it from both sides. And I think that's what really clicked in me and excited me about this project from the start, was the potential to have something we've possibly seen in a different context, the desire to tell a, a fully rounded story from both sides, um, giving you the full context, making you understand an event like Black Hawk Down. But I don't think the challenge of combining that with the the cinematic sensibility that is suggested by Ridley Scott Associates make Black Hawk Down for Netflix, that really excited me, because I've never seen that combination before. I've never seen something which had those kind of really classic documentary values at its core, the values of trying to put the viewer in someone else's shoes, trying to see something from all sides, but decided to do that in a way that was going to appeal to a mass audience, that was going to be cinematic, that was going to have the same effect on you that the Black Hawk Down movie has. It felt like that movie was just a sort of great big challenge sitting out in front of us, that this had to stand up alongside that as a companion piece somehow. That this it couldn't sort of shirk that challenge. And I sort of, when I started to look into it, obviously what I that the team had done some great research into talking. They talked to at least 100 people on the American side and many people on the Somali side. So all that research was there. And obviously, I began by reading Mark Bowden's book on Black Hawk Down, which is very comprehensive, and then listening to some of the Rangers, some of the Delta Force guys, the way they talked about it, and the way the Somalis were talking about it. And it was interesting because I felt, okay, it's interesting. There's some different war movie inspirations that are coming to me here. This kind of, with 30 years hindsight on this now, first thing that hits you is that every single person who was there on that day is dealing with some kind of trauma today. You know, this is an event which there are people in Kansas, there are people in North Carolina, there are people in Kenya, there are people in London, you know, who are all kind of living with what this day did to them. And it was a day where almost nobody won. And it sort of felt to me like, you know, this was a story which called to mind for me all those kind of the great kind of Vietnam movies, you know, The Deer Hunter, you know, it's a story about, and it hit me that this is, you know, from the American perspective, this is a story about a bunch of guys who were kids in the early 90s, a super confident time for America, who joined the army at a time when, you know, joining the army didn't necessarily mean going to war. You know, and these guys wanted to go to war, but it wasn't like it would be 20 years later when Iraq and Afghanistan were ongoing. And they get sent out to this place that they didn't know anything about. I mean, who grows up learning a lot about Somalia? Nobody, you know, and they got sent out to this place, you know, in the full confidence that they were the greatest fighting force in the world. And they end up with 18 of their buddies dying. And most of them, certainly the ones we talk to, going through near-death experiences themselves. And that, I suppose, instantly I felt in that there is, you know, a possibility in a documentary style to sort of ape those kind of classic war movies that show you a human being's trajectory through all of that. And that was kind of what really excited me about it. And I felt, so I felt that at every point then we kind of had to deliver that kind of cinematic promise, both in the storytelling and how we shot it.
Yeah, and I like I said earlier, I mean, in the times that we live right now, no matter which part of the world it is, we live in very polarized times. And to be able to, like, I'm working on a project that's trying, it's a narrative from two sides. To be able to tell that is very challenging because people have these preconceived notions that even if they see the trailer, okay, I don't want to see this because talks about the other side. So that's a very brave thing for you to do. And, you know, obviously Netflix is backing it and everything, all that you can, but still to be able to put that in perspective and humanize every side, which the original Black Hawk Down film did very well for its time. It was way ahead of its time in trying to tell both sides. It probably was not 50-50 balance, but in that time, it was a big deal to even show the other side. So, you know, awesome on that, man. I like I said, I love the series. And for me, what I would love to know is that what was the one thing that you learned that you did not know before? Not necessarily, maybe historically, but also from a humanizing element. Like what sort of snapped, oh shoot, this is interesting.
That's a good question. I mean, the truth is there was so much I didn't know. I was, as soon as I started looking into this, the extent to which I realized I had the most sketchy understanding of the circumstances around this hit me. I think really keying into the Somali perspective was fascinating. I think it was a really, really great way to understand the other side of the coin of what it's like to be on the receiving end of Western intervention. You know, and one thing that was really struck by was the generosity of spirit towards the Americans, certainly when it came to the beginning of the story. You know, every single Somali we spoke to said when the Americans first arrived, they all talked about how they were giving out sweets to the kids, how everyone was waving flags, everyone loved them, everyone saw it as a hopeful thing. So many of the guys we talked to, these guys, like, it was so great to spend time with, you know, hardened fighters who, you know, some people would call terrorists, and, you know, who were the kind of people who would be the bad guy, who would, you know, be a threat or would probably just, fall down in the back of shot. And actually spend time with those guys like Yassin Dere and Nur Hassan. They all talked about how they loved American movies, how they grew up watching those things and how they had this kind of story-eyed view of America, and the sort of, I think there's almost like a sense of disappointment as time went on, as they came face to face with the reality of what it's like being a developing world country with the world's foremost military power, intervening. And I think it felt like I could suddenly see this as the pivot point it was. That I wonder whether kids growing up in Somalia today, kids growing up in Iraq today, kids growing in Middle East and Africa today, would have that story-eyed view of America to begin with. And it felt like in 1993 was maybe the sign of something changing. That it felt having gone through everything that we've gone through in the last 25 years, going back to that point in 93 where the Cold War was over, and remembering that at that point, America was the world's hope and everyone loved, and that it took an incident like this to change that in Somalia. And possibly, that's what we've seen going on around the rest of the world. And that was also mirrored in, I think, the experience of the Americans who were there. We're Americans, we're the good guys. All of them said that. That goes without saying. And to find themselves questioning that later on was very powerful. And so I think that's what felt like a real privilege diving into this incident, was, to almost see how that unfolded over a short period of time, and how that sort of in a way mirrors what's happened on a global scale over many more years.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as you grow older, from teen years to 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, everybody's perception changes because the world around you is different and you become mature. So I remember, I think because of after the Iraq War, so this is just something personal I'm sharing. And so when the Gulf War happened, I come from a military family back home, and I was just fascinated with planes and army and all that. So I built this thick of a binder with newspaper clippings of the first day for the war until like the last day, and I was like rooting for United States. Whatever I didn't know anything about anything, but I was just rooting for the United States. And then after that, when I saw what happened in Somalia, I was not in that same place. I was in a different place. Then I saw the film, and then I understood this and this.
Yeah.
Like, okay, there's that. So, one of the key things with storytelling is, which you have done fabulously, is humanizing anyone is so important, because we don't know anybody until we sit down and talk with them.
Yeah.
And as a director of this series, you certainly did that. I mean, it's clearly shown in the film. To be able to, go in there, and I know you didn't know much, neither do I, none of us know everything about any issue, but was there a perception that you had which was refuted by an experience that you had with somebody, whether it was like Americans are this or Somalians are this or they're both this, and that just completely turned your world upside down?
Yeah, there was a moment like that, actually. I mean, just before I get to it, I mean, like, I completely empathize with what you were just saying. From what you're saying, I reckon maybe I'm about 5 years younger than you or something, because I was about 10 when the Gulf War happened.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
16.
Yeah.
I was 14. I was 14.
Yeah. But I remember exactly that. I remember cutting out the maps, charting where completely the same experience. And then, when I was a kid, I brought up in London. I used to go down to Buckingham Palace, and I had my own little red tunic and my own little bearskin hat, and I loved the army. So I had that as a kid, and then obviously I was at college when 9/11 happened and in the beginning of the war on terror. And then we all went through that experience, which obviously marked me a lot and made me see like the other side. And yeah, so I think what was the moment that you're referring to, I think we were interviewing David Deemer. He's the guy who opens the series.
Yeah.
And I hope Dave wouldn't mind me saying this. But he's a tough guy. He runs a security company. He's a New Yorker. He he's the kind of guy he would meet and you wouldn't any vulnerability and weakness from him, really. And he did, and he was quite open with us of saying, like, other people talk about their trauma, that's not how it is for me. And he was quite clear with us that he thrived in battle. He said some people kind of shrink in that experience, but he suddenly felt at home. And he said one of the guys who was with him commented, "Oh, you just look like you're having a nice day out in the park, Dave." And in gaps between filming it, he was telling us, I don't really just identify with this trauma thing at all. And towards the end of that interview, I asked him about the moment he heard the decision from his superiors that Clinton had pulled the troops out and that they weren't going to get to finish the job. And it was one of those moments where I was, Stefano, our brilliant DOP, and I was just exchanged a look because something just started happening in his body. I could just see him, he was wringing his hands, they were starting to shake. And I think something was starting to take him over that he wasn't prepared for. I don't think anyone had really asked him that question before. And the tears came out. And I don't think Dave knew he was living with that trauma. And I don't think that, and those are the moments you sort of live for as a documentary maker, where it doesn't always happen that in the room, in the moment, with the cameras rolling, a sort of truth emerges that no one really knew was there, and which shows that even the toughest character of all of those guys, the guys who'd had the least problems since that event, underneath it all was in turmoil and was really struggling. And I think that's really important, because while we're all used to the idea that, people of color, people from countries like Somalia can be dehumanized in the media, so equally people, tough, shaven-headed guys who are in the US Army, there's a certain view of people like that people have, and that, and he's a human being with emotions and suffering just like anyone else, and he hadn't experienced that day. And I think it was such a pleasure to work on this, because I think this is kind of what documentary making is all about, really, is walking into a room with someone and trying to shed any preconceptions you might have about them and really getting to the bottom of what their experience was. And that felt like a real privilege to me that day, because I wasn't expecting it.
That's a wonderful story, man. I mean, yeah, that too. I mean, I always say that directors who make documentaries are almost like psychiatrists, because we're always trying to find that spot, and
Yeah,
sometimes when we're looking for it, we don't get it, and then when
yeah,
unexpectedly it happens
yeah,
the way it happened with you, it's amazing. And it is, I truly believe, like, military people, whether it's from America, UK, Asia, wherever, you know, they're just following orders.
yeah,
Even if they're doing the craziest things, I get it. Like, it's bad. It's bad. Like, what happened to
yeah,
Abu Ghraib in Iraq?
yeah,
Like, those are terrible things. But at the same time, war messes up with your head. I'm not justifying any actions, but it just messes with your head to a point where you don't even know what the hell you've become.
yeah,
I love that story that you just told me, man, because I truly believe, like, American Sniper, which I'm sure you've seen with
yeah,
Bradley. I mean, it's like how he deals with those emotions. He doesn't, right? And to be able to see that in a doc,
yeah,
it's just powerful, man. Thank you for sharing that. I completely connect with you on that. Like, how it is now, we live in a world where, the Western countries, and I understand the point of view, they're portrayed as, colonials and all that. I get
Yeah,
it. Like it's been there for a long, but we got to move on past that. Not every individual is like a
yeah.
giant power, right? So thank you so much for that, man, for
I
sharing
think
that.
I think it's like it was why it was it was super important to me for the film to contain the stories of these guys' lives before they went out to Somalia and to talk about the training. Everyone talks about the training. I mean, Randy Ramalia talked to us about, how they were turned into attack dogs. That's the phrase he used, that their job is to be the tip of the spear of the US Army. And they are very well trained to be that. And a lot of the guys we spoke to were very generous in the way they talked to us about that and about how part of that is dehumanizing the enemy. I mean, you can't, as a human being, you can't go and shoot at people regularly thinking, I wonder if that guy has a kid, has he got, has he
Yeah.
got siblings, is he people relying on him? You can't do that. And society asks those people to go and do that. And that's what we need them to be like. We need those people to be able to do that. But boy, does it cause cause them problems later. Tom Satterley was very open about that, about how, you know, thou shalt not kill is the first commandment. And is it the first one? I think it is. Probably don't think it is
I
the
don't
first.
know which one it is, but it is a
One of
commandment
them.
for sure. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
commandment, and they're asked to go and do that, and then it's only later when you're sitting back and you think about it that you suddenly realize what you've done. And on one of the great things about this story is that guys were confronted with Somalis over a period of time up close, and usually from the safety of a Humvee or from the safety of a Black Hawk, their tactics were about speed and surprise. You're in and out quickly. This time they found themselves sharing a house with a Somali family for a night, having to take the little girl to the toilet,
Hmm.
and that's what fucked with his head, was having to see that, and he didn't want to see that because and I hope that what our series gave a bit of insight into is that that's not their choice. That's not who they are as humans. That's what the military has trained them to be, and I suppose like what society needs them to be. So that you and I don't have to go out and shoot people. They have to go out and shoot people, and they have to be like that. And so while they were obviously on the side of the world's most powerful nation, it's still just a guy. It's still just a guy, and fighting for his life. And I think it is really it is challenging to make these films in this kind of polarized environment we live in at the moment. But I think it's a really exciting challenge. It's really exciting to make a film that no one can write off. The thing I always really don't want is someone gets 5 minutes into this and goes, oh, this is woke bullshit, or goes, oh, this is kind of a MAGA film or something. You want to just be able to like, no, there's something for everyone here, and there's a challenge for everyone here. Like, no one watches this film and comes out the other end with their prejudices confirmed, because life's just not that simple.
Yeah. And I'll give you a little compliment, not from me. When the film, when I saw the trailer first, I shared it on WhatsApp groups, friends,
Yeah.
family, and one of my colleagues came back to me. He's like, "Oh, here we go, another American BS propaganda,"
Mm.
right? I'm like, "Have you seen the film? Watch the
Yeah.
film, watch the series first. Then, if you make that argument, I'm all
Mm.
for list." And he was blown away by it.
Yeah. Great.
So, it's again like these perceptions that we have,
Yeah.
because right now I'm struggling on a project. Well, I shouldn't say struggling, but it's a proof of concept about what's going on in the Middle East
Right.
to turn into a feature, and trying to juggle the balance, right? And I'm getting a lot of resistance that why are you not
Yeah.
doing this way or that way? But when I hear those things, as challenging as that is, I tell myself maybe it's me being delusional. I'm on the right path because when you are ticking off everybody, then you're doing something right to some extent, I think.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think that's right. Yeah. And I think the kind of safety as a documentary maker is just it's why I really love the direction the genre has been going in the last few years, and that there's appetite for films without an authorial voice. You know, there's no one refereeing, there's no one sort of giving you the final answer here. It's just people who are there, their version of events, their experiences. There they are for you to watch and make of what you want. I'm not there to tell you who was right and who was wrong. I'm just there to just kind of lay it out. And obviously there are editorial choices on the way, but I was very keen that I felt the way those people were telling those stories to me was like accurately reflected in what came out,
Yeah.
even if they were being truncated. And that, as you say, if different people are getting pissed off in different bits of the series, you're probably getting it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you find, I just lost my train of thought. When you are working on something like this,
Mm.
right? There's always that challenge. Let me just rephrase this question. So, okay, so when you're working on a project like this or any project, when you're trying to tell, it doesn't even have to be political. It could be,
Mm.
a husband and wife and their story and trying to tell from their angle. Like how, and I know this for myself. It's like I'm always playing a game of ping pong in my head. I'm
Yeah.
going this way and that way and that way and this way.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that if that is the case? Like, do not to let, because it's a very challenging thing not to let your emotions take over facts.
Yes. Um, I think in a way what helps for me is that the need to be fair to both sides and to be factual, for me, like really dovetails with what you want to do dramatically, you know, which is that it's not dramatically interesting to be in one mindset for 3 hours. It's not dramatically interesting to be in the same place by the end as you were at the beginning. And so that ping pong, that thing where your sympathies shift from one side to the other is something really desirable dramatically, which therefore makes it exciting and rather than as a difficult challenge, and I think that what is challenging is obviously when you're in an edit and you are trying to boil this down, you're hyper aware that you turn up one bit, you turn down another bit, it kind of shifts the balance. But yeah, I mean, in terms of emotions and facts, it's I think that the that balance is always there. It's You've got to ask the question of every fact as to sort of what is that doing narratively, and what is that doing in terms of your understanding of the bigger picture, of the bigger story. And you can't, there were a million facts about this event that we didn't have time to tell.
Hmm.
And but you know do you, if you're telling one story of, for instance, one of the challenges we had is there were, the Somalis could point to a number of different events before October the 3rd that radicalized them against the American event. Do we need to
Yeah.
tell all of them? We Ahmed Five, who amazingly was there and filmed it, very powerfully tells us about the Bloody Monday event. That felt sufficient. So obviously there are people who might say you've left out some details here. Same goes for the crimes of Mohammed Farah Hadid. There is another kind of documentary which would really be fundamentally interested in the day by day, month by month, week by week process by which this happened. But it felt to me that, like, in this kind of slightly more sort of cinematic space, the important thing was to tell the emotional truth of what had radicalized the Somalis against the Americans, what led America to want to be there in the first place. And once that was clear, you don't want a sea of facts to obscure that. You want
Mm.
to make those editorial choices that you feel get to the heart of what was really happening here. And and I think, I suppose that's a way in which I definitely consider myself a filmmaker more than a journalist. That what was really important to me was to understand those people who were there on October the 3rd shooting at each other, and in some cases going beyond what is even, normal practice in the military on both sides. What was motivating that hatred, what was motivating those feelings, and see the facts of the story in that context. Why was Yassine Dere prepared to fight to the death? Brad Thomas is, what he said, his finger barely came off the trigger that day. It's because he just saw his buddy, he was in training with, who he'd been at the beach with that morning. He just saw get shot, by a Somali crowd. You need that, and then I think once you've done that, once you've gone through those character experiences, suddenly the sea of facts starts to make sense.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Uh, Tell me, I'm just going to go backtrack and then I'm going to come back in the future. What was the reason you became a director, a producer, a filmmaker? What was there a certain, so for me, Jurassic
Yeah.
Park did it.
Oh,
It
really?
re- yeah, that was the pivotal moment in my life when it came out. So what was it that for you, that a director, a film, a moment in life that made you realize this is what I want to do for the rest of my life?
It's interesting. Like, to begin with, I thought I wanted to do theatre. You know, that was my first love, and I really loved it. But I think the film that I saw that really inspired me and stayed with me. There's a film called In This World by Michael Winterbottom, um, which is which was a narrative film.
Hmm.
It came out about 2003, and it was, I found myself watching it going, is this a documentary? What is this? Like, this felt so real, and it's the story of um, two Afghan brothers trying to escape to Europe, and it's so real and it's so visceral, and it was he was using documentary techniques to make a narrative film, and it was so inspirational to me as what you could do with film and the audience you can reach with that kind of story using those techniques was very inspirational to me. And um yeah, I think, as I said, my first love was theatre, but I think what drew me to film over theatre was the feeling that I wanted to be sort of fighting in the big arena, the arena where, the most people are watching, where people's views of the world um, are being settled. People who maybe, you know, don't read the New York Times and the Guardian and go to the theater every week. Just everybody, and um, and 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 I knew some people who were working in that field. I know there was a friend of mine who left university and went and made a documentary for the BBC, and he told me he made about these twins, conjoined twins in Africa, and he went off and had that experience. He met those people. He came back, and I can't remember, like 2 million people watched the film. You know, and I remember thinking, that's what I want to be doing. I want to go out there. I want to meet those people, and then I want to have that kind of impact. Um, and so yeah, it's sort of, it's been a kind of slightly weird sort of crooked path I've taken to doing this. But I think those when I try to look back, those are kind of some of the moments that sort of jump out as maybe that was what spurred me on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting you talk about In This World. So I saw that film in 2016,
Yeah.
and in 2018 I came across a story of an Afghan filmmaker who fled
Yeah.
Taliban because he was on their hit list. So he leaves
Yeah.
his pregnant wife and his kids behind without saying goodbye, and he ends up in Europe's worst refugee detention
Yeah.
center. The film is called Citizen of Moria if you want to check it out. But that part in this world, the narrative thread,
Mm,
is what I didn't realize until last year inspired me to use that thread in Citizen of Moria as well. So
yeah.
the narrative thread in documentary, I think to me, if that was, I think that's the best form of, I'm not trying to put down any other
Yeah.
medium. I'm working on a narrative
Yeah.
right now, but that to me is the best kind of medium because you're telling a raw story, but you're doing a
Mm,
whole arc and not
yeah.
knowing where the film is gonna go, where the story is
Yeah.
gonna go. And that's fascinating.
It's really fascinating. Yeah, no, I haven't seen Citizen Moria, but I watched the trailer after you got in touch with me, and it looks great. And I've been to Moria as well, actually,
Oh, you
because
did? When?
yeah, and probably that would have been in 2016, 2015, 2016,
Okay, so when it was in the early days.
in the early days. Yeah, we because I was also I've been making a really long form refugee documentary, which and I made I was part of a team. We made a BBC series in 2015, 2016 called Exodus, which was, an incredible experience. It was actually only,
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know
yeah,
exactly what you're talking about.
and it's interesting. Like only after making that did I realize the resonances between that and In This World. I hadn't even really had that film in mind, but in a way, it was just like you're saying. It was the same thing of following refugees as they tried to kind of make it from the Middle East to Europe, and yeah, and now I'm sort of in the throes at the moment of making a film which I've been making independently for 10 years, basically, with one of those families, who escaped Syria in 2015. And yeah, I completely agree with you. It's super challenging taking something on where you don't know what the end of the story is, but also really exciting. And it trying to put real lives into the frame of a story, it's kind of, it's sort of, I suppose it's what we're all trying to do with our own lives all the time. It's like, what's my hero's narrative of my life or my friend's life? And what you realize is that ordinary lives don't necessarily, real lives don't necessarily fit that pattern. And then you're forced to kind of think, well, what is the story here? What is really going on here? You're forced to address your own presumptions and your
Yeah.
own perceptions of where you think this story is going to go. And that's and I think, and that's really exciting. And I feel like that's what documentary will always be able to offer. Especially that kind of purist form where you're starting off at the beginning and you just don't know where this is going.
Yeah, it's true. And it just I'm not gonna go into detail about this, but we were talking about that moment earlier where the character in your film, I forget the name, became vulnerable,
Yeah.
and that moment where he never even knew that was there because nobody had asked him that question. When I was making in Citizen of Moria, there
Oh,
was a spontaneous moment where I asked Ahmed, who's the protagonist, who's also a co-director on the
yeah.
film, um, let's go to the beach and let's just do a talk on camera, just
Mm.
random. And there was no plan. It just kind of happened to me in the morning, and I had no questions. I had nothing prepared.
Yeah.
Go to the beach, and he stands at the beach on the
Yeah.
beach, and I start rolling, and I ask him, "So tell me how you left Afghanistan." And he started talking, and he started crying. He became complete. I'm like, "Holy crap!" And then I asked him, "Do you feel guilty?"
Yeah.
And then he says yes. But interestingly, that question, "Do you feel guilty?" reminded me of a time in my life that
Mm.
was buried, buried for decades, and
Yeah.
that that became the core of the film.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating, even for us as directors. I'm sure
Yeah.
you've had that experience. Like it just brings up something that
Yeah.
you didn't even know was there.
Yeah. And it's so true. As a documentary director, you are a participant at that moment, and you're bringing your
Yeah.
own emotions to it as well. It's I do find, make it doing those interviews is just the most sort of exhilarating kind of high wire act. I find you've got to engage so many different parts of your brain at the same time. You've got to have a plan. You've got to understand what you're trying to get, but you've also got to be prepared for that plan to go straight out the window. And then you've got to be able to react to the human being in front of you, be a human being with them, and then somehow kind of retain in your mind, I need to go back and ask him about this bit, and I'm going to pick back up on that again. And it's I find it so, it's you I know like musicians talk about, the minute you don't get stage fright, you should retire. Like the night before, the day before, you're anxious, like if I, and then but then when the kind of the lights are on and the camera's on and it's happening, it's a really exciting place to be, and especially when you really feel like you're starting to connect and something, things are coming out and it's real, and yeah, I completely identify with that moment you were describing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Tell me about this refugee film, if whatever you can talk about that you're working for the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's a film. I mean, we've got a working title for it, which is One in a Million, based on the idea that a million refugees left
Mm.
left Syria and settled in Europe in 2015, and our film centers around one girl who was 11 years old at that time, who we filmed, her and her family, and we she was included in Exodus, which and she was a beautiful part of that series, and that series went on to have a lot of success at awards, and it was my wife and I who were filming her together, because my wife's from Syria, and
Mm.
so the two of us we're a husband and wife filmmaker pair doing that, and we sort of felt like we'd become so close to her and her family over the course of this that it felt inconceivable that we weren't going to keep going to see her. And we also felt that the sort of few months we filmed her for the original documentary, including her first months in Germany, were just kind of insufficient to answer the question, did this work out? And both, did this work out from her perspective? That's the most important thing. Did it work out for the host country? Did they do the right thing? The world's asking, did they do the right thing? A year after that, the world changed a lot, and so those kind of two things came together in our head as an idea to sort of make a kind of boyhood doc. What if you film someone for 10 years and and see how this pans out. And so for the last 10 years, in between other projects, we've been going to visit her in Germany where she lives, and then we're in the edit on that now, and it just so happened that we were with them in Germany in December when the Syrian regime fell, and then last month we went back to Syria with her.
Oh, wow.
So it's ended up feeling like a really great bookend. That's a complete accident that's where we were drawing the line under filming and when that happened. So it's a film which is going to cover that whole period of time and what happened to her and her family in between, and it's a real kind of labor of love, and I'm hoping it's going to be a really interesting window into the reality that as I said earlier, is not the the cliches that we shout at each other about immigration. It's the reality.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you were telling me all this. The only thing that I got hooked on was the boyhood,
Yeah.
but when you told me she went back to Syria,
Yeah.
now I'm intrigued to see it. Really intrigued to see it.
Yeah.
When are you guys planning to run it through festivals? This year or next year?
We're hoping to get it in this year, but let's see. Yeah, we were due to pitch lock it at the beginning of the year and get it out to festivals in the spring, but events happened, and so now we're reassessing all that. But it'd be great if we could get it out in the autumn. Otherwise, it'll be next year.
Keep me posted about it, man. I
Will
would
do.
love to see it.
Uh,
Even if I would love to have you guys on the
yeah,
podcast because I think you and I have similar interest in storytelling from what I can gather in terms of podcast. But I would love to check it out, man.
yeah,
I'd be check it out.
great. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome, man. Anything other exciting stuff going on besides that that you can talk about as we wrap it up?
No, I think it's been, it's been great to be doing this project now, because it feels like, it's a complete palate cleanser after Black Hawk Down, a really different kind of series, and it's kind of allowing me time to think what the next project would be, because I think, Surviving Black Hawk Down was one of those projects which I think sort of opened my eyes as to what's possible in this genre, and I'm really keen to explore that further. So yeah,
Amazing,
don't
man.
quite know what that is yet.
Anything with the narrative outside of Dark World?
Yeah, I'm exploring that option. I'm really interested in that idea because I think you'll know as a documentary maker as well, documentary, there's a lot of possibilities of documentary, but there's also a lot of possibilities that are closed off by the need to be fair and sensitive to real people who maybe don't want certain parts of their lives revealed, who don't want
Yeah,
certain things filmed. And, more and more, I'm starting to look into the idea of narrative treatments of some of those subjects that, to tell those stories. And I'm having some of those conversations. I'm really excited about that.
amazing, man. I'm really
Yeah.
glad to hear that. Great stuff. Thank you so much, man, for your valuable time, for your insight, for your um, generosity, for your softness, all that stuff. I mean, it was really cool to talk to you and just talk about the deep human emotion because that it
Yeah.
connects us all. That's a tissue that connects us all. So thank you so much.
Thanks, man. It's great to talk to another film lover about it.